my name is Hilary. Today, me and my members, Summer, our group leader, Zanice, and Xingtian are going to share the 5 laws we think that affects media freedom in Malaysia. Now, I'm going to share our first law, that is the Sedition Act 1948. The Sedition Act 1948 has been used by the government to suppress critical discourse in Malaysia till today. Since the term sedition is too vague, we don't actually know what is considered to be seditious. Due to this, the government can charge any of us under sedition if our content is considered seditious. It not only violates our right to freedom of speech and expression, and it affects media freedom in all forms. That is why we believe that this act should be amended. For example, in 2015, a famous political cartoonist named Zuna was charged with 9 counts of sedition. Why? For expressing his thoughts on Twitter by publishing tweets criticizing the government and the judiciary for the conviction of Dato Seri Anwar Ibrahim's sodomy cases. The government deemed those tweets to be seditious. Even though many have requested the act to be abolished, Dato Seri Nasri Aziz has suggested that the act should be amended instead, since the purpose of the act was to maintain harmony in Malaysia. He suggested amending the act by having a clear provision on how one is judged under sedition. It's also a must to protect the act from those who want to abuse it. Lastly, the act should be modernized and amended according to local issues and the current needs of Malaysians today. Because Malaysia is a democratic country, we as citizens should be allowed the freedom to express our thoughts and opinions on the country. That is why we propose to amend the Act by changing the definition of seditious tendency by removing Section 3A and 3C of the Sedition Act that states seditious tendency means bringing hatred to any ruler or government and the administration of justice in any states, as long as those statements or content does not threaten anyone's life. This will allow citizens to have the freedom to express their thoughts on the country and also allow media personnel to do their job and report on matters happening in Malaysia without the interruptions from the government.
Next, we would like to suggest to amend the law PPPA, which is Printing Presses and Publication 1984. The reason why we think that it should be amended because the law itself is adequate and it's against media freedom of expression. First, its existence is more like an administrative guideline that used against the media, restrict political speech, and manipulating the news that delivers to consumer. We believe that media will be collapsed by subjecting them into severe tests of arrest, questioning, prosecution, and administrative blockade because they may lose trust from the audience. According to the case, the Edge Communication Sendirian Berhad versus Home Ministry of Malaysia, the appellant were charged under this act because the ministry say that their publication are actually giving the public a negative impression of 1MDB, and it actually bring negative impact to the government and also national leadership. Therefore, some media group united to protest and call for repealing this act. Next, we would like to suggest the government to repeal the act and let the journalists and print media to practice self-regulating structure. Therefore, they can perform their responsibilities to publish the truth and what audience should know without any government's interference. For those print media that publish fake news or inappropriate statement, they can be charged under other existing law such as Defamation Act, Sedition Act, or Malaysia Anti-Fake News Act. The National Union of Journalists, the Bar Council Human Rights Committee, and Geram also agreed to repeal the act because they believe that the print media have the right to publish without a permit and the government can regulate the content by using other existing law.
Hi, Jing here. The next act we think that needs to be amended is Official Security Act. Protecting our country's top secret is very important, but Official Security Act can be misused as a tool to suppress public freedom and press freedom, since the restrictions in Official Security Act is too wide and unreasonable on the freedom of expression and press. For example, in 1992, journalists that reported the controversial buying of cars for Kuala Lumpur City Hall were threatened to be arrested under Official Security Act. In 1995, 2 Harian Metro journalists in Johor were remanded under the Official Security Act, since the police think that the Ang Chun Fong kidnapping and murder case they reported by then is confidential. Section 2B of Official Security Act should specify what counts as country secret, but not just use general words to classify. For example, military secrets, people privacy data, examination, espionage are confidential, but buying properties, where had the money used, officials' behavior should not be a secret. Journalists shouldn't be chained under unjustifiable acts. Section 16A in Official Security Act should be abolished, since it owes the jurisdiction of the court to question a classification where a certificate is issued by a minister or a public officer that the document is an official secret document. This is already denied the right to judicial review and an abrogation of the power of the judiciary. Malaysia's former Prime Minister Abdullah Ahmad Badawi said that he would issue guidelines to clarify that officials should not use Official Security Act to restrict public information.
Next, we think that the Film Censorship Act needs to be amended because there are a lot of strict rules and political judgment that negatively affects filmmakers to produce films which consist of freedom of speech and of the public interest. A film should be viewed for its credit towards the country's development, not just for entertainment purposes, because films portrays different viewpoints of important issues for the audience. For example, a case of Lena Henry versus PP. The appellant screened her documentary which consists of the infringement of freedom of speech during the conflict in 2009 in Sri Lanka by the government against the citizen. She was charged under this act. Why? Because she screened her documentary without the permission and the content was somehow against the government. The Freedom Film Network also suggested to reform this act through the Institutional Reform Committee so that filmmakers can promote human rights education and release films that are of the public interest. We would like to propose for film regulating bodies such as FINAS and LPF to become transparent and independent in their work. This way, filmmakers have a higher chance to screen films that are of the public interest or consist of human rights education or freedom of speech without having to deal with politically motivated censorship. The government can also add in P16 and P17 classification to lower the risk of inappropriate scenes to be viewed by people who are underage. For example, the case of the film Beauty and the Beast, which was initially banned because of it having LGBTQ content. By adding more classification, we can screen more films as such, but with extra precaution.
Hi, Jing here. Last but not least, we think that the limitations and regulations in Communications and Multimedia Act should be revised, since the public officers can misuse this act to sue a person and suppress people's speech. For example, in October 2015, a student activist, Khalid Ismail, was charged under Section 233 of Communications and Multimedia Act due to deemed offensive to the Johor royalty on social media. In June 2016, a graphic artist, Fahmi Reza, was charged under 233 of CMA due to portray Najib Razak as a clown on social media. Again, in March 2015, the Malaysian Insider Chief Executive and 3 editors and also the Edge publisher who published articles regarding 1MDB scandal were arrested under Communication Multimedia Act. Communication and Multimedia Act has been used to stifle the speech of people on political scandal. Some of the government officials are misusing Communication and Multimedia Act to conduct autocratic policy and suppress the people. We think that Communications and Multimedia Act should protect legal whistleblowing activities and journalistic activities for the public interest. Instead of raiding and arresting the writers, the officials should conduct an investigation to the writer who wrote something fake or inappropriate. The writer must retract the article and post an apology statement. If convicted by the court, the defendant has to compensate the victim for mental damage. It simply cannot and should not be a crime to annoy, insult, or post a satirical image of a politician, particularly since holders of public office are expected to be far more open to criticism than an ordinary person. Communication and Multimedia Act is necessary, but It can't be misused to suppress freedom of speech and assault on the rule of law. Article 19 calls on the Malaysian government to urgently review Communication and Multimedia Act, introduce necessary amendments and ensure it fully complies with the international freedom of expression standards. Thank you. That's all of our group.